how did Lotfi affect me? Well, he always had a way to make everybody feel special when he talked to him. And in particular, I want to talk about some telephone calls that he made to me, which always surprised me when he would call. But he would be in the habit, he'd pick up the phone and he'd say, "Hey, Jim, this is Lotfi." And, of course, I'd almost fall over when he did that. But two in particular bear, extra discussion. And the first was back in the mid-1990s. He called me up and said that I should foster this idea of that he was calling recognition technology, which is the confluence of advances in sensor technology, image and signal processing, and soft computing for decision making that would make a quantum leap in recognition systems. And he was looking for advocates to try to put this in the curriculum at various places. We didn't do that, but it built a framework. I thought a lot about that, and Paul Gator and I wrote a really nice paper about it for landmine detection. And it's formed the basis of lots of my philosophy for example, elder care, all of the work we do. Sensors kept getting better. The computing resources and signal and software kept getting better. And of course, soft computing for making decisions, and particularly where there's a lot of uncertainty. So, I mean, the fact that he predicted this real coming together of these technologies back in the mid-1990s were pretty special. And and I felt special because he called me up and talked to me about it. He may have talked to a lot of people about it, but for me, that was a really defining moment. And the other one happened a little bit more recently in 2005-ish or so. He called up and said, "I have a question for you. How do you define a cluster?" And I thought about that, and and of course I stumbled around for a while, and I kind of gave him a glib answer, I think, of something like, "Well, I don't know how to define it, Lotfi, but I know one when I see one." But his point, of course, was that the concept of clustering, which he realized was so important in pattern recognition and in recognition technology, that he wanted to enforce the idea that it was a gradual concept. It was a vague concept. And I got thinking about that for a lot. And I thought, well, how could you characterize a set of data points as a cluster or not? And so I wrote a little paper for NAFIPS where it made me realize that the possibilistic C-means, something I have a lot of affinity for, was the perfect avenue to allow the choice of C equals one cluster, and get a non-trivial solution. And so this paper I wrote highlighted the possibilistic one means as a way to characterize whether a set of data points formed a cluster. It wasn't a big breakthrough idea at all, but when I was discussing it just a few years ago with Thomas Runkler, we came across the idea, Thomas actually came up with the idea that maybe we could use that to create a clustering algorithm where we sequentially looked for one cluster at a time in a data set until there were no more. And so one student, and three conference papers later, we came up with a really nice family of operators that we call the sequential possibilistic one means that really give a nice way of partially addressing the how many clusters are there in the data. So this was inspired completely by Lotfi, and the sequential possibilistic one means forms a big part of one of our streaming clustering approaches here at the University of Missouri. And so, you know, I mean, so it's both the personal touch, the fact that he was willing to pick up the phone and call me and chat with me about these things, and then the professional impact of it. So, I mean, there just is never going to be a guy like him. And I'm grateful that I had the opportunity to interact with him as much as I did. And so that's my story about Lotfi. He always took things as a, with a good sense of humor, actually. I mean, he always would say, hey, if somebody gives you a hard time, take it as a compliment. And he would approach a lot of things that way. And so it kind of sort of set the tone, I think, among the Fuzzy Set gang, that there's going to be controversy and that you should rise above it, as opposed to getting down and slinging away with people. Oh yeah, I remember the second year I was involved in NAFIPS. So I went to NAFIPS in 1986, I think it was in New Orleans, but 87 was at Purdue. And so I threw some students in a car, drove up to Purdue. Lotfi sat down with each one of them, and I'm sure a whole bunch more, but I happened to notice this, and had a way to make them feel like, I mean, he was totally focused on them. And he'd give them some suggestion or something. And I watched, and they all came back sort of inspired. It's like, I mean, he just really had a presence that he sort of, reach out and touched, people. I mean, whether it was a student or, one of the big guns of the community, he just really had that way about him.